like this is proposing this really interesting world where music from all different cultures coexists, and it's like a Star Trek episode or something in its optimism, and Battlestar Galactica or something like that. So I wonder if you could just say something about how you imagine these different cultures exist, because I was taught they were all separate, and yet here everyone is harmonious.
Yeah, well, the harmonious part is actually the biggest leap of the imagination, because I was taught the same thing that you were taught, David, which is that we had a history or lineage, or various histories and lineages, and then there were all these other cultures that did stuff that was kind of like the equivalent of seeing something in a museum. And there was a way in which, if you go to a museum, if you go to MoMA or something, you look at everything from the late 19th century. You look at Monet, and you look at Picasso, and you look at Duchamp, and you look at Jackson Pollock, and they all kind of go in a row. And then you go to the Asian room, and there's just all this stuff that's kind of static. I think when I got interested in Balinese music, which at this point was like in 1980 or something, it was to me like being interested in another composer. Like, oh, this is like finding out about Stravinsky, only it's Balinese music. And then when I went to Bali, big surprise, it was a whole bunch of composers and a whole bunch of musicians in a context and living people thinking and feeling and expressing themselves. And that was a bigger shock than it seemed like it should have been, but it was a big shock. And I think when I started, Lynn and I, for example, we met, he lived in the next village from the village I was studying in, and I think his reaction was kind of the same, but going in the other direction. That cultures outside of Bali were not just this other, but were something he could connect to in his own way. I think Sumie maybe had the same journey. And so at a certain point it comes back to what Thelonious Monk said, which is that all music is folk music, because I don't know any music that wasn't made by folk. Christine, of course, is using sounds from other galaxies, so she's proving us that that's a limited conception also. But the thing is that you get into the nuts and bolts of it, and it gets a little difficult, because we have our ways of thinking about harmony, and we have our ways about thinking of form and time. And every culture has a different way of doing it, and so you either go like, no, you have to do it my way, tune to my scale, play my rhythms, or maybe I can do it your way, I can tune your scales or play your rhythms. But what I think we're all interested in is sort of like, I play my scale, you play your scale, and we'll figure out a way to make that actually harmonious. So that to me is the conception.
It's very optimistic, and I really like it. I wonder if you could say something about it from the other side. Can you say something about what it's like to be part of this shifting of your culture into this other kind of culture?
Yeah, for me, when the first time I came to the US, also like, wow, it's new, of course. Because when I was born, is in very traditional family, and all my family is musician, but in traditional way how they play music, Gamelan. And of course, I think a lot of music when I came here in Venezuela, and that's when back to Bali, and try to express what I had on my experience. So this kind of music to me like just different world, opposite of my life. So, and that's because imprint what I thought about music in the future.
So do we have some questions? We have a great cross-section here of every single thing that you saw this evening. So you can ask about Sam's new piece. You can ask about Japan, anything about Japan. You can ask about dancing, costumes, costumes? Do we have some questions? Here's a question, and a microphone is coming your way.
Had a question for Cindy.
Hi.
I was wondering if you could talk about so some of the pieces you played tonight after Evan's. I was wondering how much of the timing is improvised. I was really moved by the building of energy and releasing and from a compositional perspective. I think it's really interesting. I was wondering what your relationship was with that music.
Thank you so much for the question. I guess it's kind of related to what Evan says. You said from your composition ear, it sounds interesting and unique and stuff like that. But it's not really to us because that's what we're raised up for. And you're just born here and listening to Western music. That's why your ear is getting used to that new music and timing and rhythm and everything. But when I first heard, I think that was Disneyland kind of jazz. I was so shocked. That was so cool. I went to Disneyland with my mom, and I was only like 7 years old, and Dixieland Jazz was playing in the Tokyo Disneyland, and I was so shocked. The rhythm and timing and groove, everything was different from what I was doing. So, that's the differences we have. But we can also merge to that, like what, Evan says. We can sort of like, oh, this is what I have, and this is what you have, and let's play something, and we can figure out and merge into it. If you have love to do it, So I guess it's this is a big relationship between music and word piece, I think. And let's talk about a little bit of composition of Japanese music. Japanese traditional music is all pseudo-composed, so no repeats. So like Johann Sebastian Bach is genius to make masterpiece of repetitions, right? So let's say here's a little square, and there's another bigger square, and another square. It's like all nested. It's like that Johann Sebastian Bach's composition is like that to me. But then Japanese traditional music is like all one line, starting from very, very slow and thin, and then getting faster and fatter, and then going faster and the end. So that's the image of Japanese music. So that's what I have from my ancestors, and it's gene. So it was very natural to me to like raise up like that, and I have my space called ma in Japanese. And by the way, this thing is called johakyu in Japanese. So ma is like a key of playing traditional music, but not only that, all of the world music is important. Yeah, it's just we just have different forms. That's all. We all have energy to build up, and ma is space in between, space or breathing in between. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes?
Thank you. Could you give us an analogy for Balinese music and the way it develops that we just heard about traditional Japanese music?
I think your question is maybe for Alit. But if you want to speak, she's just asking, okay, if Western music is like this, and Japanese music is like this, what's Balinese music like?
Well, it's so many kind of music in Bali. Because like, for example, like Biar style is different was born in 20th century, but like Gamelan or Slumdin is the older style is different. So yes, it's music is different role.
So that is basically, let's just say briefly that you can't summarize Balinese music as being one thing because there's so many different styles. And he referenced Tika, which is an early 20th century style that you heard a bit of in Penny Brahma, which is more, kind of, Tika itself means like a explosion, like a match lighting or a flower bursting into bloom or lightning. And that's what makes those pieces so distinctive, are these kind of sudden changes in Balinese music where it goes from suddenly soft to suddenly loud, or the rhythm suddenly changes. And you hear that also in his piece. But then he referenced older styles which are much more cyclical and static. So I guess you're not willing to sum it up as squares and circles.
Could be summed up as sort of squiggly.
Maybe some, not at all. But so if you have like a series of sort of squiggly circles, so, and you put those, but because there are gong cycles in most Balinese music which are cyclical. So you have a cycle that then repeats, but then sometimes they change a lot. And in Kavyar style, the Kavyar is sort of within those cycles of squiggly circles, but then there's just this burst out of nowhere that's through composed.
Here's a question.
I would like to explain something. It's not a question.
Okay, here comes a microphone for you.
Okay. I would like to explain Bach and Gamelan music, the difference. There's heterophony, paraphony, and bordure. These are three essential structural principles. I explain paraphony. You have a melody line, bong, 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 and then above is another one, bong, 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 and above is another one, bong, 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 bong. They are all related. These are layers of parallel sounds. There may be ornamental variations in there, but they are all dependent structurally on each other. Bach, the fugues, these are independent voices that are moving rhythmically, melodically, independent from each other. And Bordun is cantus firmus the ground, Dudelsack you play tonight. So these are structurally from a global view of all different kinds of music or folk music. In Serbia you have clarinets that play in half tones, parallels, and things like those. So that's, in the sense of Ma, I talked to a dancer in Japan, and she said, I'm coming from a sense of Ma. I place myself in between where the silences are, and this is how the dynamics emerge. So I thought this was.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you about the memorization of the music. I've noticed that everything is played by heart, so I was just wondering if it has any influence on the way you play the music, or is it something traditional, or do you have anything to say about it?
When we started the group, we were very committed to playing by memorization, and I still believe that there's something that happens to you when you learn that way. I have to admit that now as our pieces become more complicated, we cheat more. But I'm always struck, so the two things I want to say about that is that I notice now even when I go to Bali that you go to rehearsals and even the Balinese musicians are recording rehearsals on their iPhones and Androids. But I will say that when we get back to memorizing pieces, well, first of all, when we learn that way, or or even when you assimilate in that way, you have a different relationship with the music, which I think is much deeper. And maybe Claire, you have something to say about that, because she is not only a fabulous dancer, but a wonderful musician, and has been studying the traditional music for several years.
That's right. I started playing Balinese gamelan in college. I went to Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin, where I was a music major and studied classical percussion music. So all of the music I was doing in my formal classical percussion lessons with my teacher was, of course, learning or reading from notation. I would agree with Evan that there's definitely a different relationship when you're learning something just face to face with a person. Not to say that it's any better than learning off sheet music, but all of my lessons learning Balinese gamelan, I was face to face with my teacher. He would play a short little excerpt, maybe like 1 or 2 measures if we translated that into Western terms, and I would play it back. And so we would play those 2 bars repeatedly over and over again until you memorize it, and then you build little by little by little. So whereas Western music, you might fumble through an entire piece as you're trying to learn it. In most cases in Balinese gamelan, you start at the very beginning, learn a little, play that repeatedly until it's ingrained, and continuously build. So it's very different than learning to play most Western instruments in that way. And I love it.
Any more questions? Yes?
You have, I know there's written gamelan music, and I've seen some scores, and I saw some scores, and I saw some of your scores, and there are some ways to write this down. And it would be interesting if you tell a little bit how these scores are organized.
Well, in my case, I used to actually make I've had a kind of progression, because when I first would compose pieces, I always wanted to combine gamelan with Western instruments. And I would make the gamelan parts without a score, and or using just shorthand notation, and I would write out the Western parts, and so we'd have guitarists or saxophone players reading off the music while the whole gamelan played from memory. And then time got short and I got busy, so I just began writing them out. And there's in any score, I don't care if you're talking, I thought your comments were extremely sage and interesting and correct. But even in the most detailed Western score, there's an oral tradition of how you do things that's not in the score, about how you get fast, how you get slow, what the parameters of the sounds are, just the feelings and the nuances of it. So even when I would be using Western rhythms, Western notation, and approximation with the pitches, there was always an assumption that you had to actually hear it by ear to do it. Then I recently got asked by Balinese groups to compose for them, including a Litz group, but also other groups there. And I decided I really wanted to get back to actually doing it without a score at all, not even for myself. And that was a really interesting thing to do, to compose even without the image or the analogy of the notation. And the only problem with that is that, well, the good part is that when the piece is done, you've made it with the group, and the group kind of owns it with you. And so you really feel like you've all made this thing together. The bad part is it's kind of hard to reconstruct the score later, but that's okay. But I think you might also be interested in the way, because now Alit is also composing for Western instruments, and he's been working with Ensemble Modern in Germany and various other ensembles, and they need scores. And so he comes from an oral tradition, but maybe you can talk about how you write for Western instruments, having never learned to write Western music.
Yeah, when I was writing a piece for Gamelan, so I just tried to, first thing I think about, I bring to myself the different thing. So, exactly open my door, which is just, just jump forward. And first thing, I still wanna, just try it on keyboard first. But I see keyboard from my perspective example, I just choose 3 notes on the keyboard, 4 notes on the keyboard, but I feel like gamelan. It's not like piano or keyboard. So and then I choose a lot of notes, which is I like, but I think it's just run from the gamelan feeling. So whenever I feel like I like this and just put it, and then with that note, I consistent do more in the paper. Yeah, that's how.
What did you use to write it?
First, I went down with meditation, and then I showed to the room, and all of them just laugh. Laugh and play my piece, and they still laugh. What's that? What's it want? And then the conductor said, just try to read. And finally, they just said, okay, you should read on the recitation. So that's our, and then I will proud to do that. So read down, please.
So Sam, I wonder if you could say something about memorization and the way you taught your piece to the ensemble.
So when I created my piece, originally I wrote it not for me to be the soloist, but this percussionist from Boston, Sam Solomon, teaches Boston University, Boston Conservatory. And I composed the piece using a music notation program on my computer. And for me, I just block out 2 weeks in the summer and just sit there and start coming up with ideas, and gradually the piece starts to form and take shape. And when I feel like I have a finished product, then I'll bring it to the group and start teaching it to them one part at a time. And at first, not really show anyone any of the notation, but really have them all start to learn it by ear. And later on, once they start to get it, then if they want to take a look at the notation, then I'll let them. But it really helps ingrain into the group the piece. So then when we play it, everybody really knows their part.
Thank you all very much. You've been a fantastic audience. Thank you to everyone on this panel and all the incredible players. And tomorrow night we're going to do this concert again, and again, there's a reception tomorrow night. So if you're hungry at around 10 o'clock, come back. See you later.